The United States is one of the only countries in the world that requires cash bail for anyone who has been arrested and wants to stay out of jail while awaiting trial. The bail system discriminates against people of color and the poor, and it is in dire need of reform. Pretrial detainees make up more than 70% of the U.S. jail population, approximately 536,000 people. Many of them are only there because they can't afford bail. Cash bail is used as a guarantee that the defendant will return for a trial or hearings. The money is returned after they make all necessary court appearances, otherwise the bail is forfeited to the government. Defendants who don't have funds to pay a bond are forced to await trial in jail. Pretrial detention has dramatically negative effects on the outcome of a defendant's case. Those who are held pretrial are 4 times more likely to be sentenced to prison than defendants released prior to trial. Pretrial detainees are also likely to make hurried decisions to plead guilty or to a lower charge, to spend less time behind bars, rather than chancing a higher charge and a longer sentence at trial. In addition, the psychological trauma of unnecessary pretrial detentions can be devastating. Khalif Browder was a 16-year-old accused of stealing a backpack in New York City. Bail was set at $3,000 and his family couldn't afford to pay it. Browder languished in jail for 3 years awaiting trial, spending much of the time in solitary confinement. Eventually, prosecutors dropped the charges against him, but the damage was done. Browder committed suicide soon after his release. Bail practices are frequently discriminatory, with Black and Latino men receiving higher bail amounts than white men for similar crimes by 35% and 19% on average, respectively. Thank you to the Brennan Center for Justice and the Prison Policy Initiative for their information.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to pause in commemoration of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. So when I think of the DNA in terms of the makeup of a man, the man, I am reminded of the Bible myself. And in Genesis 27, it reads, "There goes that dreamer. Let's kill him and see what becomes of his dream." Well, we know that there was a day when Dr. King delivered one of his most famous speeches. It was entitled, "I Have a Dream." And the end of that speech reads, "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last." So Dr. King was a man that stood for freedom, justice, and equality, and more importantly, equity. I am also reminded again that another great document that was written was the Constitution of the United States of America. And the 8th Amendment reminds us that bail should not be excessive. It should not be required. Excessive fines should not be imposed. And cruel and unusual punishment should not be inflicted. It also tells us in the 13th Amendment that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, whereof a party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States of America. So Dr. King was a proponent of freedom. And we know that the very document that separates people, those of our ancestors who lived in slavery, the one thing that separates us are those words. And so, in that regard, we recognize that over 2.2 million people are now incarcerated within the United States of America. In fact, 25% of all of the people who are incarcerated all around the world exist right here in America. So, the Voting Rights Act was something that allowed opportunities for people of color, people all across this country to be able to vote for people who are racially, ethnically, and geographically connected and related to the voter. So I would sit here as a proponent of Dr. King's dream to be able to utilize my opportunity as a member of this body to purport and push forward the true equities, rights, and responsibilities that not only our state constitution has, who, by the way, dictates that bail should just be about returning to court and not punishment for a crime. Notwithstanding that, purport to make sure that the tenets of the Constitution are applicable to all of the people that we represent. So again, since Dr. King was a man who stood for freedom, for justice, for access, I am honored to stand on his shoulders and the shoulders of all of the people who stood side by side with him as we purported to push forward towards freedom, to be able to say to all of those people who are enjoying those freedoms now as a result of bail reform, who've gone back to work, who've gone back to school, who's taking care of their family members, that I am a living example of the fact that the dreamer's dream did not die with the dreamer, but that I get to walk in the footsteps of his dreams of freedom. And I get to stand eye to eye with all of those individuals and continue to state, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. And while it may have taken 400 years to achieve those freedoms,
Ms. Walker,
it will take an eternity to protect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity.